So I'm going to just start with a thought here, and then we'll open up to questions and thoughts. So, we mentioned before the Noahide, say, movement is nothing new. This is not a new religion. This is that God revealed truth in the world, and there are commandments that humanity needs to do. Jewish people have 613 commandments. Noahide has 7 commandments, which have a lot of corollaries, as we've been learning. And I just want to talk about the importance right now what's going on in the world, because I don't know if you've noticed, but the world is totally crazy. The world is like, this is kind of like, when you read stories in the Torah and in the Bible, you read stories about like the generation of the flood and all these, they were doing crazy, crazy things. They didn't know what's right and wrong in the most fundamental way. And that's what's happened in our world today. In our world today, we have gone to this idea of relativism that started about 20 years ago, which is basically the idea that there is no truth. It's whatever you think it is. And as that concept has been spreading right now, we live in a world right now where people don't know, a man doesn't know if he's a man, a woman doesn't know if she's a woman. We don't know what anything is. There is nothing real that people want to say. It's whatever you make the world up to. That's why it's so important that you all are doing what you're doing, because there needs to be a response to say this matters to us. As you know, one of the 7 Noahide commandments is the idea of setting up courts that promote justice, promote right and wrong. And therefore, we can't just go and say, okay, listen, I believe this and they believe that. It's again, how you do it is very difficult. How you go and you bring it out in the world is not so simple. But the reality is that the importance right now that has to happen is you really need to realize that there is a battle going on for the minds and hearts of the world.
Control too, yeah.
And it's a very, very serious battle. And you have to therefore know, in a respectful way, to stand your ground and say, no, I don't believe this is not okay. I disagree.
Be bold, yeah.
People have a big problem with this, because, and this is a very crucial thing in terms of how you feel about people. Let me ask you a question. You have a brother and he's messed up. He's got crazy ideas. Can you still love your brother? Of course you can.
Try.
You could try. You could try. Hopefully you could succeed. You could say, listen, I love you. You're out of your mind. What you believe is ridiculous, but I still see something good in you, that no matter how much you are not, living this, I see it, which, by the way, is really a definition of love to a certain degree. The Hebrew word for love is ahava. Ahava is the root of the word hav. Hav means to give. And it's a very fascinating thing. The more I give to somebody, the more I feel connected. I put myself into that person. If you want to love somebody, practice giving them. I mean, you have a kid who's a child who's got problems. The more the parents involved and tries to give, the more they feel love. So there are ways to feel connected to people. There are ways to see the good in somebody and say, I have to help bring this out. I see something good in you. It just buried in a lot of bad stuff. And that's true for most of us. There are some, unfortunately, evil people, but on the whole, people want to do good, and there's something good buried with it. And you gotta polish take the diamond out of the mud, and you gotta clean it. But that doesn't mean I have to say what you're saying is correct when it's not. I have to be able, and that's why it's so important what you're all doing, to be able to stand up and say, certain things, they're just wrong. It doesn't mean I think you should be destroyed. I mean, think you're terrible. I think that you're very, very mistaken right now. And I'm standing up and I'm saying that. So I want to have that as our opening foray into our open discussion about anything you want to talk about.
Rabbi, that leads into the first question I've got here on YouTube. I have a gentleman named Vishal all the way in Mumbai, India. And he's asking, he says, there are clothes that I have which include tribal artwork symbols. Should I continue to use it or switch to something different?
Well, again, if the clothing is idolatrous, meaning it's an idolatrous symbol, you should not use it.
There you go, Vishal.
Now, there is a little bit of difference here where a person is able to take an idolatry and say, I nullify this and I give it no credence anymore. And that would disqualify, that would take the status of the item and make it from being an idolatrous image to saying now it's nothing. But on the whole, since you have people who are, may recognize something as an idolatrous image, then you should stay away from that. Again, it doesn't mean if your tribal clothes are necessarily idolatrous. They're not necessarily. If you have nice tribal clothes, that's okay.
And it's just decorative. Decorative artwork is
something that was used for idolatrous images, then you should stay away from. And you have to be careful, in India particularly, you have to be careful. Because India, there aren't, there's a question, how many people are really idolatrous in their fundamental beliefs today? Meaning that we have an idea that people learned things from their ancestors and they keep these things going. Certainly the ideas in India in the past, there certainly were idolatrous things. I don't know where India's at today, but there certainly, definitely were idolatrous beliefs and idolatrous images. And I think, you have that the same thing in the world I say about like Christianity, for example, where, most American Christians very often, I don't know in Sweden and other places, but many of them believe, deep down, they believe in one God. But they've been told that it's combinations and they have to understand, no, God is not a human being. Again, that's not possible. You misunderstand the whole idea. God doesn't have components. So, but the striving to believe in one God, and they have a confusion they may have inherited from their ancestors. And that's what we have to do, is to teach them. So in India in particular, even if a person doesn't believe in idolatrous things, certainly idolatry, which was so prevalent in India, there are images there that people still do that you should avoid because they associate them with idolatry, and you want to uproot that and say, no, there is not many powers, there's one power in the world, and that's it.
Rabbi, I have a quick suggestion that helps a lot of people that come out of other religions as to know specifically, because when you read the Torah text itself, it isn't as clear as the Mishnah Torah that talks about the laws of idolatry. And that is, it'll say an image under the earth, in the heavens, and they think of just an image as being idolatrous. And what we have to delineate is, it is an image in which deity or divinity, or it being God or a God, is subscribed to as a culture, as a whatever. And if whatever image you have has no association with any of those things as being a deity, now, unless it's used in idolatrous practice. Okay, I want to make sure that's clear.
That's why, like things like images of the sun, which have been used.
Right.
There are certain images that we don't make anyway, because they have been always associated, and they are things that people worship. So again, let me explain here just to go off a little bit what Rod just said on the concept of it. I mentioned this once before. Human beings want to limit God. Do you know why they want to do that? Because the reality is we can't understand God. When I relate to someone, I say I want to understand them. But it says that to understand God in his essence is impossible. There's no way you could have any conception of God in his essence. And therefore, the human beings strive to limit, say, I understand this. Just to give you an example, you have a friend, and you got to like get into other people's heads to realize that they have a different view. But we kind of put our ideas on other people. So does people do the same thing with God. We try to limit. And that's why trying to limit in any way, even if you didn't come to idolatry, is the first step. When you say, oh, I understand God, you know why he does this because of this and this and this. It means you think you understand God. Why did he command me? Oh, this makes sense. That one I don't understand. So once I start to do that, it's a human thing to start to limit. And that limitation of trying to define God eventually leads to why I give images, because why people make images that they worship. Now, let me talk about idolatry a second here, because the idol worshipers today, and India, fascinating that was brought up there, because I mentioned a few weeks ago that the idea that Abraham had certain children. Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael became the father of the Arab nation. And Isaac then had two sons, Esau, who became the father of the Western world of Rome, and Jacob, who became the father of the Jewish people. But Abraham had other children. It says that he sent to the east with gifts. What were these gifts he sent to the east? He sent to the east with gifts. So I mentioned that it says he sent to the east gifts, and the gifts, the sages tell us, were names of impurity. Now, what kind of gift is that to give your kid? So it doesn't mean it meant that they were tuning into spiritual forces, but they didn't have the ability to tune in fully. And therefore, they could be misused. And I don't know if this is true. This is conjecture, but it seems to make sense. Abraham, the children that were sent to the east, they do coincide when the Brahmin arrive in India. The same time when Abraham sent his children to the east. So Brahmin is like Abraham. So it could well be that the people that became the Brahmin that arrived in India with these ideas may have been descendants of Abraham, and they had certain spiritual knowledge, certain spiritual power. Early idolaters had spiritual power. They weren't saying this, most of them were not saying that this thing is God. What they were usually saying was, this thing represents a spiritual force above, and we're going to make an image of this thing now and affect the spiritual force. That was the original, like, I don't want to say smart idolaters, because I can't be a smart idolater in the first place, but the ones that were more talented, it wasn't that they believed that the image itself was their power, but they thought the image was a representation of some kind of spiritual power. That's what they believed. And therefore, that's idolatry, because they're trying to hook into a power in the world. In Hebrew, it's amazing because the name of God that is the master, I'll explain some idea or a second. There are many names of God. You have to understand why that is. Why is there many names of God? In Torah, there's Hashem, Elohim, there's just Ekia, there's tons of names. Why? It's an idea. We're not understanding God himself. We don't understand God. Every name is how God relates and acts in the world. There's a name of God called Elohim. That is God as the master of all the powers. He created powers in the world that he runs. And idolatry is trying to hook into a power and trying to manipulate it to get what you want. That's what it is. And that's why it's such a self-serving thing, because it means a person wants to get control. And here it is. I'm going to relate to this power and get what I want, instead of relating to the source of all the powers that he created, which is God himself. Okay, very good. All right. Any other? Let's keep going here. That was my introduction.
Yeah, let's keep going. I want to add this while somebody else is getting queued up, ready to roll. One of the big aversions that Christians have when we are told from many Jewish rabbis, Christianity is really not idolatry. based on what you're talking about, that's how we see it. It's that when you consider JC is the intermediary between God and man, and that he is God's son, we just like want to run from that, because to us that seems like idolatry.
Yeah, I think it is. It is.
Yeah.
I think what you're referring to is there is a big debate amongst the rabbis if Christianity is idolatry or not. Certain forms of it for sure are, certain forms of it, but it's problematic. However you want to define it, it's certainly problematic. Three is not one. God doesn't have a son. You can't have a physical image. There are many problems that even if you want to say it's not the straight idolatry, but it certainly is hitting on that in so many ways. So Ricardo is asking, how is it not idolatry? I'm not saying it's not. I think it is, but I think that there are opinions that, since some Christians want to try to say we don't really believe in three gods, we believe in one, so maybe they say that it's not some type of idolatry. But it is, in the sense that the person is attributing it to three godheads. That's a problem. That's idolatrous because there's only one God, and a human being can't be God, and God doesn't have it. So all these things are. So I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying that's what Rod was referring to before. That some people discuss, on the technical legal aspect of, because a lot of times you speak to Christians, and you guys know this better than me, but a lot of times you speak to Christians, and they're like, you get the sense that they want to say, I believe in one God. And so I say to them, so I say, like, why do you hang on to these other things? Like, why do you, and I honestly, as a Jewish person, I have trouble understanding it. I really do. I look at it and say, why are you holding on to this stuff? You believe in, essentially what you're saying, because you're a thoughtful person, you believe in one God. And let me explain why that's thoughtful, just to understand this. The people who were barbarians in the past believed in powers. Look at the ancient Egyptians. I mean, these people were masters of the occult. We can't build pyramids today. We don't know how to do the mummies. They were masters of the occult. So much so that when Moses arrives and he starts doing the signs that God said, Pharaoh says to him, it's brought in the Midrash, says, you're trying to bring witchcraft to the place of witchcraft? This is what we do. So they understood that they were hooking into these things. So, but in a certain sense, as I mentioned before, the revolution of Abraham was the most successful revolution in history. The belief that there is one God. And I want you to understand why it changes everything. When you believe in these powers, your world is a cruel world. Your world is a world that there is no perfection, there's no truth, there's no right, there is just warring things, like, when you learned in mythology in school what the Greeks believed, and they had their gods fighting each other. That's the way the world was. The modern thoughtful person wants to believe there is a whole unifying system. Even in science, the four force, the nuclear force, the strong force, the weak force, gravitational. There is a belief in scientific world that there should be a unifying theory. We should be able to pull it all together. Why do they think that? Because when you look at the world in an enlightened way, you see it comes from one source, and things make sense, and things fit in, and things go to a purpose. When you look at the world as random powers, it's a messy, bad place.
Right.
So the ancient mind was that. The ancient mind was like, even if you read in the book of Daniel, it's like fascinating. You read, like, the story of Nebuchadnezzar, the powerful Babylonian king, and when he realizes God is, God, he almost kind of can't say it. He wants to bow down to Daniel. And Daniel says, what do you mean? Not to me. What are you talking about? But he's like, no, I don't really mean that. I know God is the God, but you're the little God. So it's like, it's this mindset of manipulating powers to get what I want and not realizing the unity of the world as God's plan. Modern people who are intelligent realize that that doesn't make sense. And that's Abraham's revolution. You know, I was talking about Abraham's revolution. It's great. You know, as he has a revolution. And this was my, you know, like I as many of you know, I just retired from my synagogue here in Atlanta. But when we started the synagogue, basically I told everyone, come to my house. I'm going to feed you and give you a drink, and like that's how kind of I built the synagogue. So where did I get that from? I got that from Abraham. What was Abraham doing? Was he fooling people? No. What he was doing was he was saying, when you believe the world is this power, that power, the world is a mean place with these rivaling things, when you realize that God created the world to give us, there is a goodness that is the structure of the universe. And that really is why modern people. So my answer to your question, Ricardo, is like this, is that I do think it's idolatrous. However, when I talk to sometimes to Christians, I feel like you can get to them. And you guys can get to me more than me because you understand it. I'm like, why are you holding on to these things? Why do you want to twist your head and believe in three is one? And why do you want that for? Right? You believe in one God, goodness, God. He gave the Torah. Why you? And the answer most of the time is, I think in many places in the world, is because this is what they got from their ancestors. I mean, I have a lot of people I've converted, you know, in my time as a rabbi, and I have heard stories about people that converted told me that, you know, when they first asked the question in Christian school, how, like, you know, the nun, whoever it was, said, okay, let's pray for this person's soul now because the devil has their soul. If you teach a kid that, the kid's never going to ask a question again, right? The kid says, I don't understand. How could three be one? And then you say, okay, you're going to hell. You know, in Judaism, you can say that word. It's not a dirty word. It's Gehenna. So then the person, I can't ask. I got to shut down the part of my brain because of the fear of what I've been given over. And that means that they might not want to believe it, but they may be afraid to really question. Okay, good. What else?
Sandy?
Sandy. Oh, hands up. Right. Thank you.
Hi, Rabbi. I spent my life in Christianity until about 10 years ago when I met Rod and started studying with him. And I was taught all of that time that Satan was this powerful being that was everywhere, walking around like a lion, seeking whom he may devour. That was the phrase we kept hearing over and over, and that he was this powerful being. So if we take the doctrine of the Trinity out of Christianity, would the fact that we've still got this idea of Satan as this powerful being, wouldn't it still be idolatry?
Yes. The idea of Satan, the way the Christians understand it. I'm not an expert in Christian theology, but from what I understand, the way they believe idea of Satan, that is idolatrous, 100%, and that is not what it is. Let me explain what it is. It was a very famous teaching from one of the very deep mystical books, but I think this is appropriate for everyone to share. The analogy is like this: is a person, let's say, is a king, and the king now raises his son. He trains his son, and he wants him to be a high, moral, righteous person. And the son goes through his training, 20 years. Now the father sends him out in the kingdom, and he gives him money, and he dresses him up, and he says, remember everything I taught you, and be a righteous person. Son goes out in the kingdom. Then the father, the king, hires a woman to try to seduce the son. So now the woman is working for the king. So as the woman is trying to seduce the son to get him to do these things, she's hoping he says no because she works for the king. The force of evil has no power of its own, and that becomes idolatry. That's the Christian belief, or become idolatry, that God's in a fight with the devil, and even if he's going to win in the end, according to them. But the mere fact there's a fight, that's idolatry, right? It means it's another power. Rather, what is it? Is that God creates this force of concealment in the world, and that the mission of that force is to give us the challenges that we overcome. The force that God creates in all of its ways explained as the Satan, or as the Yetzer Hara, the force of negativity in individuals, all of that concept, even the angel of death, it's all the concept of concealment in the world, that what God does is he creates the idea of concealment to test us, to have us overcome it. But that's not separate from God, that's working for the king. I see I missed the written question there. So if someone wants to tell me what, I could probably pull up in my chat.
It's just a comment. And you answered it already. The next one's Ricardo said he never really understood the whole fight issue between, Christians used to talk about the devil, etc. Atalo has a question or comment.
Okay, Talo.
Hi. When Pharaoh was worshipped as a god, as a fake god, if you would bow to him, technically that would be idolatry, right?
Yeah, I didn't hear I didn't hear who you said originally.
Pharaoh.
Pharaoh.
Sorry.
Yeah, Pharaoh did make himself a god. Yes, Pharaoh was claiming, as was many of the people of those times, the king Gotham's claimed that they were gods. Yeah.
So if somebody had the intention of bowing just as a king, it doesn't matter what your intentions are, or you're still doing.
Great question. It really it centers around the whole story of Purim that we just had right now, when Mordechai wouldn't bow down to Haman. So when you bow down, like in the East today, they bow as a sign of respect that you could do to somebody, because that's not bowing as service. That's like we shake hands. You can, as a sign of honor, that was done. But when the person makes themselves into an idol, then that's a problem. That's why Mordechai wouldn't bow down to Haman. He was wearing an image of an idol. He didn't want to bow down to him. So the idea of bowing as an honorary statement to a person like a king, if he's not claiming he's God, then that is just an honorary statement. Once he says he's God, that's a problem.
Okay.
For sure.
One more.
Yeah.
In the difference between idolatry and technical halacha idolatry, and idolatry is the idea, like different ideas that are idolatrous. What's the difference? Is there something to separate them, or
the difference? We talked about this last week a little bit. The difference is that everyone here is an enlightened person that wants to do what is right. The thoughts we have in our head come out in our life. I'll give you an example. If you have somebody you're angry at, husband, wife, angry at each other, and you decide not to say it, at some point it slips out. They press a button, and all of a sudden, whatever's been cooking in your head comes out. Why? Because your mind is the place that is the control tower that will eventually lead to what you feel and what you do. There's two relations. I think we talked about it once. There is the mind, and I think you actually asked me this a couple weeks ago, but you have the mind. When you know certain things, you could affect the way you feel about it and the way you act about it. And then there's the feelings that sometimes can affect the mind. But the point is, you have a control tower here that if you know what's right, you can then work on developing the feeling, the action. So to be obligated as a person doing a tremendous negative thing by doing idolatry, it comes down to various actions. Even various thoughts of accepting idolatry are a problem. When there's subtle thoughts, so for people that are not so, advanced, so they don't realize, but the subtle thoughts think they can come out later on as actions that will be bad and will be borderline on an act of idolatry. That's why I'm explaining those. So for example, let's say a person, they're not that smart. They can't understand the idea of one. So they have these things of like power, and then they don't think they're doing idolatry, but then it might come out, oh, I did this in this way because I wanted. So the actions that follow from the mind, if you don't have a clear understanding of it, could be tainted. So the difference is that there are actions that we do that are considered idolatrous. We mentioned that last week, the different things that any way the idol is served, or the 4 ways that in Judaism, where they bring offering, they would shech the animal, slaughter it, and they would put the blood. We mentioned this last week. The 4 different aspects, those are actions of idolatry. A belief in another power is a problem too. To believe there's another God, to believe that there's multiple gods, that is even by idolatry goes by the thoughts also, because if you believe it, it's a problem. So then there's subtle thoughts that to understand them is important, because if you don't get them right, it could come out in an action that would also be a problem.
Like a gateway.
What's that?
Like a gateway to idolatry.
That's right. That's why it's
very good.
Yeah.
Stephen asked a question. He said, what about pictures in your home, or sculptures, or such a thing that aren't worshipped? Are they idolatrous? I think I explained this a little bit earlier, but you might want to reemphasize.
Well, pictures generally aren't. Some sculptures might be a problem.
Right.
Different opinions about that. Like a full human sculpture has problems.
Yeah. Like Rod, back in 2016, Rod, I won a Remy Award from Houston World Fest, and I opted for a crystal flat plaque rather than the statuette. And I was reading up in the divine code, and there was, as Rabbi had mentioned earlier, if the statue had the nose knocked off or the ear broken off or something, made it permissible, but it was still gray area. So I just stayed away from it and got the crystal plaque. So
right, the whole image of a human being is a problem. There's certain images like that. There's discussions about possibly a lion and lion, eagle, a human face, and a bull, or some people say it's all together. There are certain full sun should be avoided. So there are certain 3D images that should be avoided. These things, the verse says not to make don't make with me. Hashem says that images of the sun and the moon. So there's certain images that themselves are problematic. Generally speaking, today, most pictures, unless the picture is of an idolatrous nature, most of our pictures, if they're not 3D, are not. Again, if something is used for idolatry, then it's a problem. Certain sculptures are, if they're full human beings, they should be avoided. Ideally, probably should avoid, even though there's different discussion about it, you should probably avoid like a lion, a bull, and an eagle, full picture. You probably should avoid that. Those are basically the idea.
I just gave the link to Fred Rawls, who's joined us from Kentucky, right? Fred, you're in Kentucky?
All right. I know Rabbi Ingber. We've had
very similar classes. That's right.
way back in the day.
That's
Somehow
right.
we got disconnected.
Okay, you got reconnected again, huh?
Good to see you, Rabbi.
You too. Okay, good. So did you have a question, Fred?
No, but you're in Atlanta, right?
You're in Atlanta. Right. Yeah, we like Kentucky. Yeah. As you can tell from my southern accent, I wasn't born in Atlanta, but
Right. And my fiance lives in Birmingham, so that's only like 2 hours from Atlanta. So
Right.
I was the rabbi in Birmingham for a few years. I know Birmingham well. Yeah.
maybe on one of my journeys down there, I can make it over there.
Okay, it'd be great. Yeah, I like Birmingham too. All right, good. So very good. Any other questions, or I can keep adding things, but it can go idolatry. You can go into anything else. It doesn't have to be on that.
Rabbi, I've got Nina from Brazil asking about a mandala. Is that something that should be avoided?
What's I don't know what mandala is. What's a mandala?
Let me just see here if I can.
Also, Sandy's in the queue, Rabbi.
Okay. So, Nina, we're going to look up what a mandala is. Dan's going to explain it to me in a second. Let me take Sandy's question and tell me what a mandala is, and I'll try to define it. Sandy, so what are you going to ask?
Yeah,
It comes from Sanskrit, Hindu. It's a symbolic diagram used in the performance of sacred rites as an instrument of meditation. It's basically a representation of the universe, a consecrated area that serves as a receptacle for the gods and as a collection point of universal forces.
Yeah, it doesn't sound too good.
Yeah.
The meditation, and this is where, by the way, I'll just divert onto your question in a second. Talk about astrology a second. Astrology.
Yeah. Can you see this picture, Rabbi? This is a mandala.
Yeah, it sounds to me somewhat problematic because to have picture of the world, yeah, but this is already seems to be certain things that they're using with the idea of, they say, gods and those things. You're probably getting into dangerous territory there. Like for example, when you look at astrology, there is a real root to it that's true. There are aspects of it that are real. Now, you have to understand what this means. Let me explain by astrology a second. Astrology, we have a book that was written by the first human being, Adam Arisha. There's a book. We have a book that he wrote. It's called Sefer Malach Raziel. The angel Raziel, he has a book that he wrote. In that book, which is a tribute to the first man, human Adam, there is a chart of astrological signs. And it actually is very similar to what we have today. In Hebrew, it goes by the month, because in the solar calendar, it goes to the 22nd day or something like that. In Hebrew, there are months. Each month is a different sign. So now I want to understand that there is an influence of the stars, but here's the problem. Why is it idolatry, or has the potential idolatry? Because what people think is that the stars are causing these things, or the force that's in charge of the star is causing that. When people understand that God created the world and there are many aspects of the universe that reflect God's flow, it's called the mazel, the what he's giving down to the people and the world, those could be, if you know how to read a sign, you could see maybe the imprint of that in the stars. So then you could theoretically be correct. But the problem is that as this object you mentioned before, for generations, idolaters are taking it and trying to use this for different forces of the world, and then they create things that cross over a line instead of realizing, like, for example, the month of when is Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Judgment. It's in the month of Tishrei, which is generally, I guess, October time. So that month is a month of scales. That's a time of judgment. That's not an accident. That there is judgment in that time of the world. That's a real thing. That's why God created the world. That's a time of judgment. So, but when people who don't know now, don't understand Torah, go and they take it, they start to make up crazy things,
symbols, yeah, and then that goes out.
So that's so I would stay away from that, because
she said it in the context of what if it's for homework or as part of a career. And I said, well, what kind of class is it, or what kind of job? I guess like you have sofers that write scripts, and anybody who would have a job doing such artwork. Let's say somebody's just like a hired painter, and they paint the sides of buildings or something, and somebody wants a mandala on it. it's then just a recreation, isn't it? It's not, it still is held, it's still linked to the idolatrous belief system.
Right. So Nina, if this is a practical question that you're having, let me look into Mandala exactly to find there. Generally speaking, if someone tells you to make something that would be an idolatrous image, you have to say no. If it's something that may not be, and therefore you're doing it, then there may be an allowance, but I'd have to really look into what a mandala is, what the beliefs are, what the people who get it say like that. So if it's a practical question that you have that someone's asking you to make it, let me go through it specifically to answer your question. What's the halachic legal thing you could do? The general idea is that you don't want to create or make anything that people use in idolatrous ways, which this sounds like it, but I'd have to go through in more detail and understand it to see if you have an allowance to make it. If people like there's certain things, for example, there's a discussion. Italo is asking like yoga meditation. So yoga meditation, you have to know, like they have this thing called like the sun solstice or sun salutation, which like you got to be careful because the original motion that was created was thanking the sun as a power. Like that motion in particular was created. You have to know a little bit, even when you're getting into yoga, and this is where it's a problem. Like I do know some of these things. I do know some like Tai Chi and certain martial arts that I'm familiar with, but you have to kind of know because there are things that cross into borderline issues. So you got to know where you're talking about. And that's why in the mandala, I got to find out if, like, for example, there's a question today. Let's see.
It is a religious element. It is a religious.
It is done today because, like today, there's a question. Like, if you go to school and they make you learn in school Greek mythology.
This is our next question. I got Zakia down in Lima, Peru, and she's asking, "What about sculptures?" Because she's an artist, right? She's a painter, and some of her classes, in order to pass, she's got to do 3D sculptures of certain parts, or full body, certain things like that. And I from my understanding, we discussed that a little bit earlier, right? There's a whole bunch of restrictions when it comes to sculptures, isn't there?
Well, but again, I'm gonna. I know it's how, like, I got your message for me. If anyone's got a question that has to be answered in very great detail, my email is rabbiingber@gmail.com. You can send me exactly, because when you get into halakhic questions, you got to go into a lot of great detail. So I'm giving you a general, but if it's something particular that you are going through, then you can email me and I'll try to answer. Generally speaking, with sculptures, you want to be careful and you want to avoid doing a full body that looks exactly like a person. If it's missing something, that would be okay. Now, what happens if they're forcing you to do it and it's your career and they're not going to use it for an idol? That message me and I'll answer you that particularly. Generally speaking, you don't want to create a sculpture of a full person. If whoever asked the question, email me rabbiingber@gmail.com, INGBER, and give me exactly your case, what they want you to do, and I'll try to answer it.
Yeah, I gave her your email in the chat room.
Okay, wonderful. Good. Okay, so back to Sandy. Sandy, you had the question earlier.
Yeah, this is kind of taking a different topic. Going back to the Noahide laws, I have heard in other classes and read in commentaries that over the years there have been more than 30 laws listed as Noahide laws, and then it's been another number and another number. So my question is, when was it brought down to the 7? And who decided those 7? And why was it different numbers over time? Okay, so good question. So the answer is it's always been 7. And 7 is, the Talmud records 7. It records 7 based on the verses in the book of Bereshis. There is discussion about other elements, like what's called mitzvah sichlios, logical commandments that Noahide should also do.
And that's why you have some other calculations that people say, because if you include this type of mitzvah that is, let's say, logical, certain commandments, then you could have a different number. But the number 7 as the root of it, that's always been, that goes back to Adam and to Noach. That's been 7. The idea of the other numbers and calculations where some people calculate, it's because there are other categories that there's a question, are they obligatory or not obligatory? So like, for example, what's called mitzvah sichlios, certain mitzvot that are logical, that everyone makes sense. There's some opinions that say a nochad has to do it, and that's beyond the 7 ones. They still have to do the ones that are logical. That's why you have different numbers.
Thank you, Rabbi.
The actual number, but there are possibly additional ones that are outside that because they are in a category that still has to be done.
Thank you.
Good.
Moral imperatives.
Moral imperatives, exactly. 7 moral imperatives, and that's how I started today's session, which really is, let me tell you like this. If the world wouldn't steal that one Noachai commandment, the world would be a great place. Because stealing is not what you think. Stealing is not going and robbing a bank, that we know. Stealing means you didn't cut the guy in line, means you didn't waste somebody's time, means you didn't wake somebody up. It's a sensitivity to the boundaries of human beings that once society relates to people as what I cannot infringe upon what's yours in any way, shape, or form, then society would have harmony. So it's not just don't go rob a bank. That's not what it is. Stealing. It's why Noachai can learn the details of these great questions throughout the Talmud. If you go and wake somebody up, have you stolen their sleep? Be careful. You don't want to wake people up unless they want you to wake them up. But otherwise, you decided that you're going to go fix your house at 5 a.m. and you're banging there and you wake everybody up. You may have just stolen their sleep.
That's why some say.
I got a lot of neighbors doing a lot of work here. I can tell you, it's not pleasant.
That's why you also hear about 100, and can you subdivide them into even more categories, more mitzvahs?
I mean, 100 of the Noachai commandments, you're saying?
Yes, I think I heard of 90s on the 90s.
I don't know. It's a question of a count. There's a lot of different counts, but again, 7 is the root. The other things are Noachai obligated on certain groups of commandments. The one that comes to mind to me, the most obvious one is the ones that are called logical, sichliot. So the opinion is that Noachai are obligated on that also, which gets you to a very high number because there are a lot of commandments that make sense, that are not like, say, let's say, I'm wearing tzitzit here, that I could not have thought on my own. It's God giving me a commandment that reminds me of the commandments. But there are certain commandments that are simply logical that a person should do. That's simply, but they're logical, and so that's why the numbers grow. Different counts.
There is also something to help give you clarity, Atalo, is the 7 categories are rooted all through the 613. You'll find components and descriptions within the 613 that help clarify one of the 7 or parts of the 7. So when you hear, there are 7, there are 20, there are 30, there are 96, what they're really talking about is there are other applications of those categories that are found and rooted in 613. And that's what they're generally saying. There's another question that was interesting. And we see Rob from California said, wouldn't the universe be separate from God, also be an independent entity? Rob, you might want to clarify that a bit. Rabbi, did you understand that?
No, is it written down? Should I read it?
Well, it's written down. I read it to you. Rob, could you come on and explain?
Can you hear me?
what you're saying.
Yes.
I'll try to roll that.
So what I was reading when I had maybe I misunderstood, but in the Shamash.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Rob. Say again?
You cut out.
God universe, not God created the universe as an independent or a separate entity or a separate force.
Okay.
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
I think I'm getting bad reception.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the question comes down to, is the universe created separately, independent of God, or nothing is independent of from Hashem?
Right. Yeah.
The truth is, your question is a very, very deep question that you have to get into a lot of Kabbalistic discussions to fully answer the question. God created an entity. We in this world are created as separate beings, separate entities. We don't understand how, from God's perspective, there is nothing that is called separating from God. His presence fills everything. We don't understand that. From our perspective, we see ourselves as separate, and we see everything as separate. We don't understand what it means that from God's perspective, there's nothing else in the world. We can't understand that. Once you understand that, you would disappear. You wouldn't be able to exist because you'd be. The trick in life is to see how the aspect of ourselves that's a godly component is in us, which that will last forever, because that's the part that's connected to God. That's the aspect of ourselves that is eternal. But what you're asking is, yes, God created the Hebrew word bria, creation. It's in the word bar is outside. Idea of the idea of the world was created ex nihilo, something from nothing, which, by the way, was the whole discussion for many, many generations. The Greeks wanted to say the steady state theory that the universe has always been there. So how they dealt with God, that there's a lot of little fancy footwork the Greeks had, because they wanted to say the universe has always been there. In the Torah, we know that God created the world, created something from nothing, means the world didn't exist. He created the world. That's why, by the way, as an aside, that's why the Big Bang Theory, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but the Big Bang Theory in the beginning of its inception was really rejected by the scientific community, because it smelt of the idea of a creation. The Big Bang Theory, which is the idea that everything exploded from one singularity, from one point, meant there was a starting point to creation, which the scientific community didn't want to say, because a starting point of creation means someone had to start it. The theory that the world was trying to say until then was the universe always exists. So don't ask me who made it. It's always been there. The world was created something from nothing. That's the creation of the world. So God did create things that have the quality of being outside, that we're not God. These entities are, that's the mistake of, let's say, the people in the East who want to say that, oh, everything is God. That's a mistake. No, God created entities that are not God. They're separate, different things. On the deeper level, there's some way that God's presence is not in any way hindered, and he's all that there is. How that works, you can't understand that, because at that point you would disappear from existing. So I hope I didn't confuse you. We got into a little bit of philosophy and Kabbalah there. It's a great question, Rob, but that's the bottom line. The bottom line is God created a world that is a creation that is outside, that didn't exist before, and the things that will last forever we want to find is the godliness in ourselves, the component that we are connected to what will exist forever. Hope I answered the question. That was a very deep question. I try to do it in
Yeah, Rabbi, we're getting a lot of echo back from your chair rocking.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
Also, we're at the top of the hour, so if there's not any other questions or comments, Rabbi, would you have a closing remark that you would like to provide for the community?
Sure. I'm going to tie together the things that we saw today. So we ended up mostly talking about the idea of idolatry, and although in general the world thinks maybe it's not there, as Italo said before, there's subtle things in our minds that we have to really be careful about. In our lives, there are a lot of things that happen that pushes us to feel going from one thing to another and being subjected to the whims of the universe. That's not what's happening. We have to realize there's a plan, there's a design, everything is purposeful in our world. That's the concept of saying the Shema. The Shema, to say that there is Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, God is one in all ways of oneness. The simple first level is one and no other, but the deeper meaning is there's no other power. And the deepest level, which is what Rob is hitting on before, is that there is really nothing else other. How that works, I can't understand that. But there needs to be a moment in life where you take time every day to focus on that there are no other powers. There's nothing else dictating the world, especially when you feel that the world is completely going off the deep end. I mean, you got politicians saying one wrong word and you could have World War III on your hands. So that makes us feel, whoa, wait a minute, this world is out of control. And these people are dictating things and saying things and creating a world, and we feel we're helpless. That's why you got to hook back into the root of one, as we started saying with the session, to realize that no, nothing is out of place. In the end, you're going to see how God was, with our free will, even though we're separate entities that can choose, we're never going to choose anything ever. It's going to be what God didn't ultimately allow or want in a certain sense. You can't do that. Yes, he gave you free will. He let you go so far, but you cannot destroy the world. You cannot go past certain points. Those things are all God's going to move that to show that even with our free will, even with the idea of seemingly we're separate, it's all going to fit into what his will is, because that is the true direction and one thing that exists in the world. And so my encouragement to you all is to take a little bit of time every day, just to close your eyes and to really realize there's one source and he's directing the world and there are no accidents. The idea of a random world is the cruelest, most bizarre concept. The idea that is the understood conventional wisdom that the world's an accident is a painful reality, that it would be the cruelest place in the world. I get hit by a bus, no reason, nothing. There's no reason. You can't say it's unfair because there's no reason. That's the opposite of Torah. And that's why if you look in the Torah where it says there's the blessings and the curses, God says, if you say it's an accident, why this happened to me? It's an accident. It says God responds to us b'chamas keri, with the anger of the accident. God's not trying to hurt us, but he's saying you're entering into a world where you're seeing things as just happenstance. You're stuck in that reality, and you're going to get stuck deeper and deeper. And therefore, it behooves us to take a moment. None of us here, no one here in this call, thank God, are idolaters and this and that. We need to focus our minds to realize the power that there is one master of the world, is one plan, and nothing is going to change that or hinder that in any way.
Beautiful. Yeah, the complete and utter sovereignty of Hashem. Yes.
All right. Dan, go ahead if you want to go ahead and close out.
Okay, I think we're going to close it out for today, folks. Thanks for everybody that joined from India and Peru and in Germany, those of you that came from all around the planet to catch this session. Rabbi Ingber, are we on for next week as well? Are we aiming for? Is that in the books?
On for next week, same time. We may do a topic. If you have requests, you could send it to me in an email. I wanted to do a little bit of the question and answer just to get to know the group a little bit. I'm used to teaching live and you get to see people. So I want to get to know you a little bit to hear where everyone's at so I can tailor make my classes for what you all need.
Oh, bless you, Rabbi. Bless you. Well, everybody have a wonderful, wonderful week. And we'll see you back here next week for more of our Working Together series with the Nativ group down in Texas. Always a joy to be with many people in a Zoom room. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye for now.